Welcome to the Growth Perspective Podcast. I am your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Kristen Eccleston. How you doing today, Kristen?
I'm doing really well, King. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Looking forward to this particular topic. And with that being said, one of the things I do want to add to before we get started, and I've just been adding this to all of my shows and meetings, just as a way of kind of setting the context. That is, just talk about what I'm grateful for. I call it my gratitude moment. And I think that's really a great way to just really begin any kind of meeting or conversation. So, with that being said, I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have sound mind. Grateful for another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. A mother who's alive and have sound mind and a good health, and the infinite possibilities that they may provide me. So,
I love that.
thank you.
I love that. I'm going to share too because I think it's important for us to share our gratitude, and it's a I think a good practice for us to get into. So many times we focus on what's going wrong and we forget all
Hmm.
the things that are going right. And so I'm really grateful. I talk about it occasionally, but about 2.5 years ago, almost three now, it's crazy. I went through a really tough period of my life where it seemed like, everything that could go wrong went wrong type of period of life. And as stressful as that was, I'm so grateful for everything that I learned through going through that. It was a rough 2.5 years trying to kind of pull out of going through all these multiple things. And I'm not getting into detail just because it really was like everything you can think of, from my mother having throat cancer to things with my career. But I'm so grateful in the long run for the lessons that I learned. Sometimes I think life can be uncomfortable, but there's always something to kind of learn from it. And I'm grateful that although there was a transition period in my life that was difficult, that I was able to ultimately end up in a better place. And so it was some hard lessons to learn, but overall, I am grateful for where I am now in my life and everything that was taught to me along the way.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I'm blessed that I'm happy that you shared that with us as well, and I'm happy that you've actually gone through that and now you're on the other side of that. So, thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. I think so many times too, when people are going through it, it's hard to see that there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. And what I like to share with people is the light at the end of the tunnel is not always next week. Sometimes it's years of work, but it's there. The light will be there. You just kind of have to keep pushing, even when it doesn't seem like there's going to be any relief anytime soon. I promise you the seasons will change and things will always get better. And I say that too because today is World National or World Mental Health Day too. So something to
Oh,
keep
it
in
is.
mind. Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Uh, you know, I don't know when these new days get created, these national
I know,
days, but it
right? And
is
there's
nice to
one for
hear.
everything.
Yes, it is. It is. It kind of dilutes the days though, but I think that this is definitely a one that needs to be something that brings attention to the day because
Mhm.
mental health is now becoming much more of an issue than we actually do talk about in our society. And I think the way it gets
Yeah,
treated is from police getting involved and how that gets escalated and
yeah,
misunderstandings around that. So thank you for mentioning that and pointing it out to us today.
absolutely. Well, I'm excited though because we have a great topic to talk
Hmm.
about today. One that we've touched on slightly in the past, but I think is something really important to talk through as far as growth perspectives go. And we're going to talk about core values versus a fixed mindset. And I say that
Hmm.
we've touched on that briefly because I feel like we have gotten semi down that path before when we're trying to figure out, is this a core value that I'm feeling? I'm hearing people's opinions. I'm taking in new information, but my mind is not being changed. I am not seeing things any differently than I had previously seen it. And so, does that consider me to have a fixed mindset? Or does this mean that I have core values that I am consistent with? And these are just what's meaningful to me. And I think it's something important to jump into because there is a little bit of this fine line between what is a core value versus what is a fixed mindset. And I want people to be aware of what the differences are because sometimes I think we can get hard on ourselves and we can sometimes forget um, that we're human and we conscious process. And we'll talk about conscious processing because I think that's part of the what we're going to talk about today. But I'm really excited to talk about this topic, and hopefully you are too.
Absolutely, I am. Absolutely, I am. Because I'm a person who definitely works to on a daily basis make sure I don't have a fixed mindset about any particular issue or topic, and that's growth in my mind. But it's not always easy just to say that, or
Mhm.
it's a challenge to make sure that my mindset is not fixed, because I believe that on certain issues and certain topics, I think I do know the answer. And I know that I don't know if that's ego kicking in, or is that my, as my comrade Reggie Marr says, my cultural given. The way I was
Mhm.
born. I don't know if that's there, but I'm always battling that fence to make sure that my mindset is not just fixed. But in relation to the topic, as we talk about core values, I will ask you to first, let's define that just to make sure our listening audience really understands what is meant by core values.
Absolutely. And I'm going to use a little bit of an example to do that. And I want to say it was in one of our past uh, pod podcast episodes where we were talking about how we raise children or how we discipline children or what the structure around children is
Mm,
about. And I think that's kind of how we started to rabbit hole down this. So going back to that, a core value to me is when you have decided that that you're not fixed on anything mindset wise, but you have ultimately determined like this is something that is meaningful to me. And going back to the example that we used, we were talking about I expect children to be respectful of their elders. I expect children to have certain mannerisms or manners or a way that they present themselves when speaking with adults. And I think that was part of what our conversation was in a previous podcast episode. And that's where we started to talk about core values because then I think we were talking about gentle parenting and how that came into play with gentle parenting. And you have parents who don't necessarily hold these strong boundaries or make children respond a certain way. And we were starting to talk about this gentle parenting, and that's what kind of questioned, is this a fixed mindset that I feel towards this, or is this a core value? And I would say core values are things that you just feel so strongly about, like, and they're not in a negative way. I don't think it's hurting anybody, right? If you expect children to be a level of respect or to talk to adults a certain way, I don't see that as something that would hurt anyone in order to have that expectation, right? That's not
mm,
anything in my mind that's negative if that's your expectation of how children should be speaking to adults. And so your core value is this is what my expectation is. This is what I feel strongly about. So it doesn't matter if I come in and I tell you all the reasons why children should be able to talk to you however they want to talk to you about. I'm probably not going to change your mind, but I don't see that as a fixed mindset. And I don't see that as you not having a growth perspective. You just have a core value. And if anything, I feel like it's a pretty solid core value. Again, it's not a value that is hurting anybody or is negative to have children learn how to respectfully talk because it's a skill set as they become adults is going to be important for them as well too. So that's an example of one thing, but a core value is just something that you believe strongly in. Maybe religion is something that's really strong for you. So if you were to talk to somebody who was an atheist and they tried to give you all their reasonings for why God didn't exist or why religion is not something that is important or shouldn't be important, you're probably not going to be receptive to what it's saying because your core value of religion is it is a part of me. It's a cornerstone of me. It's how I live my life. It's how I see value in different things. And it's a structural thing inside of you. Now, where to me, I see the difference between a core value and a fixed mindset is I'm always willing to listen to what somebody is saying, but you're probably not going to change my core value. But I'm not going to get oppositional with you. I'm not going to tell you all the reasons why you are wrong. I might have a conversation with you and kind of give you some of my core values back and question, well, okay, I hear what you're saying, but have you thought of it this way or why not this way? But again, I'm going to be probably sticking to my core value. It would probably be very hard for someone who in this particular example, who's an atheist, to change somebody's mind who is very strongly rooted in their religious beliefs. So those are kind of what I give as a definition more through example of what a core value is, something that it would be very hard for you to be shaken at any level, even with hearing somebody else's views and opinions of it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So let
Okay.
me ask you that question with that definition. Would you say that the way the country, from a culture standpoint, is shifting? Is it shifting more to a fixed mindset, or people are just doubling down on their core values? Which, and again, I'm saying this based on the media, based off what tends to be popular. Like, for example, we talked about Lizzo last week. I
Mhm.
know that has some core values and fixed mindsets in the way that was handled. And then I also want to talk a little bit, as you answer the question, about one show that's very popular right now, that happened back in the 90s. It was Jeffrey Dahmer. And to me,
Mm. I
I
just finished
watched that
watching
on
that on
Netflix.
Netflix. Yes.
Yeah.
So we can go down that path too, because I watched it too. Woo, that was intense.
And see, that to me, there's a lot of fixed mindsets in that
Mhm.
particular way that was handled, as far as
Mhm.
his case and his life. So I
Yeah.
kind of want to unpack that. But I just want to, before we do that, I just want to get your thoughts on which direction do you see that the country seems to be going in? Does it seem to be more the fixed mindset from a leadership standpoint, or the zeitgeist is more people just kind of doubling down on their core values?
That's a really good question, and I don't know that there's an easy answer to it. I'm probably gonna say something that people are not going to be fans of, but it's something that I truly believe. And I feel like we're at a point where I don't know how honest people are always being about what their feelings are or what they feel like their values and their opinions are, because we've created this kind of counterculture where if you are not in alignment with something, and it doesn't matter what it is, but if you're not in alignment with it and it's kind of the popular opinion, you almost can't come out and say that you're not in alignment with it, because you are going to get attacked, or you are going to be seen as somebody who is not hip or in alignment. And I'll give an example to kind of better um, reiterate what I'm trying to say. But essentially, if you think back to the Olympics, I really support Simone Biles and the fact that she came out and she said, hey, my mental health is important to me and I'm not going to compete because ultimately I have to do what's best for me. And I completely understand that. And you didn't see anybody come out and say otherwise. But I have a feeling that there probably would have been a large amount of athletes who probably would have felt like, hey, you made it to the main stage, and how do you not compete? How do you take away from somebody else who would have wanted to come to the main stage? And but I don't you didn't hear anybody say that. And I can't believe that it's not because anybody felt that way, but I feel like nobody said it because they would have been chastised. I mean, it would have been like media frenzy over the fact that they weren't supportive of mental health, because mental health is this big movement right now and mental health is this big thing. And I feel like that happens all the time now, where people might not necessarily be in alignment or agreement with something, but they don't dare say that they're not, because they're afraid to speak their opinion, or they're afraid to say, well, here's why I feel this way, or here's my thought process on it. And so sometimes I wonder, in more terms to your question, is are we always being honest, or are we painting this picture of what we think people want to hear or people need to hear, because we're too afraid of getting into the conversation of you and I having a different opinion? And I feel like that's what it ultimately comes down, is like we're afraid to have different opinions from what the status quo or the popular opinion is going to be, because people are afraid of the backlash that might come from it. And that's why I think you and I talk all the time about it shouldn't be a backlash to have a difference of opinion in somebody, as long as it's being done in an appropriate way. And an appropriate way is I'm listening to what you have to say, you're listening to what I have to say. And maybe at the end of it, my opinion starts aligning with yours because you gave me a bunch of ahas or things that I hadn't thought about. But we've gotten to this point where we're almost too afraid as a society to have conversations because either one, you're afraid of being chastised, or two, you are afraid that it's going to ruin your career. You're afraid that you're not going to be able to think clear. I mean, I just feel like there's so many complexities now, and we're not being open in our communications with each other as a society because we're either afraid of people being mad at us or taking things the wrong way, or we're afraid that we're just going to get locked into one of those conversations where it just gets ugly, and that's how we communicate with each other nowadays. So I don't know that I answered your question spot on in what you were trying to get me to ask, but that's really how I look at society right now. And so if you try to link it back to core values or fixed mindsets, I think a lot of us have fixed mindsets, but it's because we're afraid. We're afraid to have conversations. And I don't know the answer to why we're afraid of people shaking our core. I guess we feel like maybe these are our core values, and we're afraid of people making us realize that maybe they're not core values. But I think there's a lot of communication breakdown that's happening right now, society wise.
I agree. I mean, and to your point about Simone Biles, she wasn't attacked as much as the Naomi Osaka was, the tennis star that came out with similar,
Yes, that is
saying
true.
she
That
had
is true.
mental issues and how she was attacked and chastised and, called not being grateful for being where she was and not being competitive and all these other. It's like for someone to win at the highest level, for someone to have the audacity to say you're not competitive when they've already won, you know, I,
Hmm.
I, I yeah, I would understand that. But see, that to me just goes back to the fixed mindset that people have. It's like, for me, what I see in society is that, and that's one of the, I think the unfortunate things about being a star celebrity is that when people see you as that, they want you to perform as that no matter what. Like
Hmm.
you're no longer a human being. You are this tennis star, just perform and be a tennis star. I don't really care about your politics, your feelings. Just be this tennis star, be this comedian, be this actor, make me laugh, entertain me. And if you're not entertaining me, then I don't really care about you.
Yeah.
And that seems to be more prevalent now. And then on top of that, where people say if you do come out and say something that I don't agree with, whether it's politically, whether it's um, supporting a particular cause or one side, then I'm going to counsel you, and you no longer deserve the right to even generate income anymore because
Hmm.
you disagree with me on this particular topic. And that's where I see kind of where that's the direction we seem to be going in with this council culture. We talked about this before,
Yeah.
but before we go too much down that rabbit hole, what I want to kind of do is bring us back to um, Jeffrey Dahmer. So I do want to talk about that before we get too far down the weeds. And
Yeah.
the reason I want to talk about Jeffrey Dahmer, and when I saw the show, I was like, I'm not going to watch this. I already know everything I need to know about Jeffrey Dahmer. So why would I want to watch a new show about Jeffrey Dahmer? But then
Hmm.
you had even Evan Peters, which I like from American Horror Story. So I said,
Hmm.
I'm gonna watch one episode and see how it goes. And the first episode was just so compelling, the way they
Yeah.
did it. It was extremely compelling. Even though if you know the history, you know what happened, but you didn't know which particular person that was at that time. So you didn't
Hmm.
know really how that was going to play itself out. So they did get you into the show. That's what most people said. But real quick, I found it to be really interesting. I don't know if this is going to be spoiler alerts for folks, but a lot of
We just have to
people,
tell them.
yeah,
Spoiler
yeah,
alerts if you haven't seen Dahmer, okay?
exactly, exactly. But in watching the reviews, one of the things that people said that really resonated with them was episode number 6, and that was the one
Hmm.
that really centered on. I'm forgetting his name right now, but there was a gentleman who was gay and he was deaf, and Jeffrey
Tony
Dahmer,
Hughes.
Tony Hughes, yes,
Tony
and
Hughes.
they were touched so much by that episode because of the fact is it gave his perspective and it showed you who he was, where you
Yeah.
typically don't see that from serial killers. You always see things from the killer's perspective, and then the victims are just fodder. They're just
Yeah.
there to get killed, and you hear their names, but you don't know anything about their lives, their stories, or their humanity. And what I found to be interesting about that was I had a total different feeling about episode 6, where
Mm,
I felt that episode 7, which focused on Glenda Cleveland's reaction to hearing um, the noises coming from her apartment, of smelling the smells of the bodies decaying, hearing the drilling, hearing the fighting, and then calling the
mhm.
police, and then not getting any service from that, getting any resolution to those issues. That to me was much more frightening and much more compelling than, I would say, the episode with Tony Banks. So was it Tony Banks? I'm sorry.
Tony Hughes.
Tony Hughes. I'm sorry. So anyway, where
No,
I'm
I
going,
only know that because I go down rabbit holes anytime I watch these shows, and then I have to, like, know everything about everyone, and I went down that rabbit hole with him.
so I appreciate that. So with that being said, to kind of start us off, was there any particular episode in particular which you would say really got to you and really brought out a lot of emotions, or brought out a discussion that you may have had with your husband or someone else, that you really felt that this one episode, or was it the entire series? I'm just curious.
I I have to say there were so many things in this series. I definitely found the episode with the young boy who Jeffrey Dahmer had essentially given a lobotomy to, and the fact that the police were there and this kid still got returned to his apartment. I found that to be incredibly impactful because I feel like that definitely gave a message of what was going on in the 90s in that neighborhood, how this serial killer essentially was trusted and this young boy was returned to him. I did find the episodes with Glenda Cleveland to be incredibly powerful too, because it really showed a woman. And from what I understand, I believe Glenda Cleveland is a real person, but I want to say Glenda Cleveland didn't actually live next door to Jeffrey
That's true.
Dahmer. So this is, I believe this character is supposed to be embodying the real Glenda Cleveland, along with a woman who actually did live across the hall from Jeffrey Dahmer. But regardless, I still found it to be incredibly powerful how much this woman was not only impacted by the experience, but how much her voice just wasn't heard, and how, had it been heard, could have it prevented other loss of life. And I found that to be incredibly impactful. But I did find the story of Tony Hughes to be incredibly impactful. And I don't know, maybe it's because of the fact that he just seemed like a great guy, or maybe because there was a hearing disability. I mean, I'm not sure, but that story ate at me so much. And I think part of it was from a psychological standpoint of, I think so much of what Jeffrey Dahmer did, there's definitely high levels of trauma from his childhood, and God knows from what his mother, if she really, if the way it was portrayed in the show, if she took all those pills when he was pregnant, who knows what that actually did to him when he was in the womb, and then the amount of trauma that it looked like he did experience. And I'm not excusing any of his actions, but obviously we know that trauma plays an impactful role. And the way that this show, at least, and I mean, who knows what really happened in real life, but the way the show showed it is, this guy Tony could have been an amazing person for him. Do you know what I mean? Somebody who finally wanted to be with him and wanted to connect with him, and there was so much potential, it looked like, for this healthy relationship, if what could have been, even though so many things had already happened. I mean, you heard him say to his father, Jeffrey Dahmer, at least in the television episode, I found someone, I'm so happy. And then for him to do what he did, it was just so gut wrenching, because you really, I feel like that was the first episode where you had really spent a lot of time with the victim, as you shared. They had touched on it, but this episode you really spent time with this victim. So I felt like you saw it in such a different capacity. And from someone who loves to deep dive into psychological aspects of people, like I was all over the map with it. So I found it to be a very compelling show. And I mean, you and I could go down so many rabbit holes with growth mindsets, fixed perspectives, with this show just in general.
Well, see, and that's exactly why I wanted to bring it up, because to me, I think that the only reason that Jeffrey Dahmer was able to be as had the longevity that he did as a serial killer, killed 17 people, was because of the fixed mindset. Because he was
Absolutely.
enabled his entire career. I mean, he wasn't clever, so he wasn't like he was someone who was able to really cover his tracks, and and was like we've always heard about Jack the Ripper, and no one really knew who Jack the Ripper was, and but it was like he could have got caught on the very first murder that we saw,
Oh, when the police
and
officer pulled him over.
when the police officer pulled him over. And then the
Mhm.
military, he was just constantly enabled. He
Yeah.
got an honorable discharge instead of a dishonorable discharge for what he was doing, which was drugging his fellow soldiers in the military. And then he
Yeah.
gets out, and again, so it was several times that he could have been stopped long before he even got started. So then, as you talk about now, the police returning the young boy back to him, you know, and then how that was handled. See, that to me goes back to the whole fixed mindset mentality. It was like, for
Mhm.
example, the officers in charge, and again, for me, as a person who focuses on advocating creating new systems, like I argue quite a bit with people. They say we want to change the system. I say no, there's no point in changing a system that was built on racism and marginalization. The system is designed to do exactly what it's creating. You can't change a component of a system and think you're gonna get a different output. You're gonna get the same output from that same system. And so my point is that system that showed the judge sit here and give Jeffrey Dahmer, you know,
Mhm.
1 year, and then his probation officer not checking in with him. All that's bad systematic approach, and that's why he was able to continue to do what he was able to do. So it was so many things that to me echoed a fixed mindset from people who believe that because of his color of his skin, his gender, the way he looks, that he can't be this bad or he's not going to be this evil. So we keep giving him a chance in order to correct the mistakes he's making. Their minds are fixed on that he could not be this monster that he was. And because of that, they enabled him to continue to do what he did for that period of time until they were pretty much forced into it by the gentleman at the end escaping and pretty much going to get the police. Now, what was interesting, and the Netflix show didn't show this, but I actually watched the gentleman who was able to escape being interviewed on Donahue, and he
Mhm.
actually said that he was taken back. The police sent him back by himself at first to the apartment.
Oh, heck
So
no.
the show shows the police came with him. No, they said that they sent him back by himself first to get the handcuffs key from Jeffrey Dahmer. And then he
I
said,
mean, I hate to
so
say
I,
I'm not surprised, which is
right. And
sad.
that's exactly. You would think now again, I don't know why Netflix chose not to show that, just like you say that they kind of created Glenda Cleveland like living next door to Jeffrey Dahmer and dealing with that, and you come to find out that wasn't really the case. But
Mhm.
it just goes back to the fixed mindset within these systems, and that's where I'm getting at the end of the day. Now, would those individuals believe they had a fixed mindset, or would they say their core values? Because whether it was because they were gay, it didn't matter, or because they were black and gay, it didn't matter. A black, gay, and foreign, it didn't matter, right? So, at which level was the fixed mindset and the racism impeding their actions from seeing the humanity in these individuals who were suffering?
I mean, sadly, I think it was all of those things. I mean, you even heard in the episode how the officers made this whole thing about having to go get deloused or whatever it was after having been in the apartment, and they definitely made it seem like it was because of being in an apartment where there were two men there who were involved in sexual activities, and so I think I think the show definitely showed, and I don't disagree with that representation. Especially in the 90s during the time when the AIDS pandemic was significantly high, there were so many misconstrued information that was going out there, and I think that you're right in 100% that Jeffrey Dahmer probably got away with so much of what he got away with because of the fixed mindsets that these police officers had, probably with the way that they were viewing the neighborhood in which Jeffrey Dahmer was living in. And it's disgusting and it's sad that that is what happened. And we know that it's not just there. There's been injustices throughout our entire country in different areas, but I agree with you in the sense that Jeffrey Dahmer got away with so much of what he got away with, probably because he was a young white male who was, I mean, I hate saying this, not that I find him to be super attractive, but he wasn't a horrible looking guy. He came from, I believe his father, I don't know if he was a doctor, but he definitely was a scientist. So he looked like he came from the right type of home, from the right type of area. And so I think there was a lot of things that he got away with because of the color of his skin, because he was a male, because it was the 90s and there was a lot of corruption that was going. And you're right, it came to these fixed mindsets because people looked at him and just assumed he couldn't be a bad guy because he's this white guy and so you can't be a bad guy. But I mean, he obviously was a horrible guy doing horrible things. And but I think again, it's a to me with a fixed mindset, core values, it all comes down to communication too and what you're willing to communicate with. I mean, Glenda Cleveland was clearly trying to communicate her concerns to a system that was not willing to listen to her because they already had a fixed mindset and were not willing to consider the fact that yeah, this white guy could be doing some of these horrible and horrendous acts. And it's really sad, and I think we still see to a degree, I mean, not even to a degree, we know we still see that today too. Yeah, there's been more, I think, light shined on things, but we still see a lot of injustice in this world because of fixed mindsets. And I know I harp on this generational thing all the time, but I really think that a lot of times what's happening is these generational hand downs that come with these mindsets, and people just haven't yet woken up to the fact that it's no longer serving me, it's no longer serving society to continue to have this fixed mindset. But it's like nobody has woken up yet and gone, oh wait, hey, this is an issue. Like I feel like so many times the reason why we get trapped in fixed mindsets is because we are handed down information generationally from a source, usually our parents, that we trust. And so we assume that, it's correct information or it's accurate information when it's not. And until you finally get a wake up call telling you otherwise, I think that's why people continue to live in these fixed mindsets, unfortunately.
Yes, and see to that point, and I go back to the systems of that helps to perpetuate and create these fixed mindsets. Like I was watching some because once I finished watching Netflix show the Jeffrey Dahmer case, I had to go and start looking at all the real footage and
Hmm.
watching the interviews and watching the different press news sites talk about Jeffrey Dahmer. And it was like right after he was arrested, and all the conversations were very, I would say, surprised and tolerant. No one said anything negative about Jeffrey Dahmer. It was more like they were just surprised that he had done it. And I would
Hmm.
just listen to that bias of how they reported him. Like, this man, this mild mannered, not bad looking guy. And they made a point to say not bad looking consistently. Like, he wasn't ugly, as though you have to be ugly to be a serial killer.
That's
And
a good point because I've even said that. So you're right. I mean, that's a very valid point.
yeah, and to me, it's like when it comes down to it, I can't think of a serial killer who I've ever seen outside the movies. You would say, well, yeah, that person definitely looks like a serial killer.
Hmm.
He's ugly enough to be a serial killer based on his physical features, right? So
Hmm.
it was just really interesting, like I said, going back to the system part of why that he was really enabled even after the incident. And then everybody, and to this day, like Netflix is now, I think there's maybe 3 or 4 other documentaries, the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes, you know.
Hmm.
So it's like they really begin to just infuse us even more with more Jeffrey Dahmer. And it's like, here's a sick individual, and he's getting much more, I would say, praise now. If he wasn't murdered, he would be a star. And it started to
Hmm.
show, and even in the show Netflix, where he was beginning to enjoy celebrity. People were sending him money, women wanted
Yeah.
to marry him,
Yeah.
and that gets created by this system of now pretty much raising up this monster to be this fascinating, interesting um, man and put this enigma around him instead of just calling him
Mhm.
what he is, which is a monster, right?
Absolutely. And I worry too sometimes, especially when you hear about things like school shootings and different things. Like I sometimes fear, do some of these young people see the aftermath of it? Like the not the celebrity, but the attention that comes with it. And does that sometimes spur people to make psychological decisions because of the attention that comes with it, because of the celebrity that comes with it? Um, because I do feel like there's this psychological aspect there that some people don't see the impact of their actions, or don't even think about how, "Oh, okay, I might not even be around to see my celebrity, but my name will be remembered and people will talk about me." And I've always been of the mindset, when things like this happen, we shouldn't say people's names. We shouldn't. There shouldn't be any kind of credibility. I mean, it doesn't mean that we don't report and we don't talk about the victims, but ha- I think it's really impactful that all about the person who did the bad deed, but how much prior to watching the show did you know the names or the stories of the people who had been the victims? You don't.
Exactly,
You don't hear about
exactly,
the victims.
exactly. And just real quick, not to really make this a show about serial killers, but just show you that on the same path, Ted Bundy, you
Yeah.
know, and then the fascination behind him. So now there's several different documentaries about him, his tapes and the interviews, and it's like the fascination behind actually talking to someone who brutally killed over 30 women,
Yeah.
brutally, and had no remorse about it whatsoever. But yet and still, this is a person who gets all this screen time, all this attention, and then the fascination behind saying he was charming,
Mhm.
you know. And again, now what that's going to do in another young man's mind who may be someone who's isolated from society, who feels bullied, and now he can say, well, if I do a similar crime, I will get much more praise and attention, and I will pretty much live forever in infamy in the minds of Americans going forward if I do these heinous crimes.
Yeah.
And he's also,
Yeah.
he's actually awarded for doing something that's so appalling as that. And again, to your point, I can't think of anyone that can mention, one of Ted Bundy's victims.
Yeah.
So why is the victims not mentioned? Their family suffered, but yet still Ted Bundy is high. I mean, is awarded this level of intrigue, and that's, to me, goes back to the fixed mindset of our culture. Again, the system saying that because of who he was, his gender, his race, and the fact they felt he was charming, the fixed mindset is this is a person that's worth investigating. This is a person that we can generate capital from. This is a person we can now draw attention to and make money from. And that is one of the fixed mindsets, I believe, that we have to really call out, really deal with, and look forward to changing going forward.
I absolutely agree. And I think part of that, though, is, I mean, and I think we've touched on this before. I mean, look at the news media, right? If you were to turn on the news right now, how many positive stories are you going to hear? Probably
Very
none.
right.
Right, very few, right? And I think a lot of it is the media knows from a psychological standpoint that we are all attracted to negativity more so than we are to positive. I mean, an example I love to give people all the time is, you could have somebody tell you, 100 different people tell you how wonderful you are, and one person tell you how much they can't stand you. And it's always the one person who says a negative thing that messes with us, even though you had 100 other people tell you you're phenomenal. And it's because our brains are hardwired to remember negativity, to be more impacted by negativity. And I think to some degree, I mean, there's always psychologists and different people who are in tune to these different programmings. And I'm sure there's some media psychologist who feeds the media, like, you want ratings, because that's what it's all about. Do you want ratings? Do you want sponsors? In order to get these ratings, focus on the negative, because that's what people are drawn to. And so I think to some degree, we kind of exploit how our brains are naturally wired. And unfortunately, we are attracted to negativity. And that's just because that's how we were made as humans, so that back in the day when we were put into a situation at the watering hole where the hyena showed up, you remembered not to go back there because you wanted to survive. And our brain is wired to survive, and negativity is usually associated with danger. And so our brain just gets attached to this negativity more than it does the positive. And I think that's why we also have to talk all the time, like, we got to be positive, think positive, positive affirmation. We have to work harder to be positive than to be negative because our brain is already inclined to be negative.
That, and also our society, again, going back to the systems, is designed to just feed us negative information,
Yes.
because negative information creates certain behaviors that are more conducive for capitalism, such
100%.
as if you feel bad about yourself, you're more likely going to overeat, you're going to drink,
Mhm,
so now you're going to go start being a consumer, because very few
mhm.
people feel bad about themselves and don't consume one thing, either drugs, food, or alcohol. you know
Absolutely.
Now, here's a question I have for you that I'm curious about. Where does trauma play a role in creating a fixed mindset? And what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, and I can't speak for our entire Black community. I can speak really for myself when I say this.
Mhm,
I have a very fixed mindset when it comes to the police officers,
mhm,
and that's because of not what I've seen on TV, but what I personally experienced. Right, and I would say
mhm,
this, and I think this is something that, to be honest, I think white people don't really understand this about how Black people feel about police officers, in the context that no matter how successful you may be, what your celebrity is, how much money you have, at any given time, a police officer, and it could be someone as lowly as a rookie cop, can have a bad day. And if he pulls you over, can ruin your life. He has the power to ruin your life at any given time at his discretion, right? And that's
mhm,
always a possibility in the mind of a Black person, right?
mhm,
So with that being said, now, interesting enough, I'm the son of a police officer, right? My father was a police officer. His brother was a twin, was a police officer, and I had a uncle, another brother of my father, who was a police officer. So I grew up raised in a cop family the first 12 years of my life. But
mhm.
at this stage, my mindset is fixed that it's not all police are bad. I don't believe that. So let me make sure I make that statement to be clear. But I do believe that the system around it, the ones who are bad, are never prosecuted. There's
Mhm.
never a consequence to the ones that are bad. So that's to me, it's a fixed mindset. Like, I truly don't trust the justice system. And my question now, with that context being, how much does trauma play a role in creating a fixed mindset in this kind of case?
That's actually a great question, and I'm actually I'm gonna go back to Dahmer a little bit because I think there's a really good example in there to bring into your question. But there was the time where the young boy who had been returned to Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment by 2 police officers. And eventually, when it all came to light within the show, you saw that these police officers went on a suspension. But it really did seem in the show that the suspension and I think in real life too, that it was more of a facade to make it look like something was being done. And then I haven't fact checked this, but at least in the show, you saw these police officers not only get reinstated, but win like Officer of the Year award or something along those lines. But they were celebrated and they won some type of award after everything that had happened. And I have to fact check that because I just was flabbergasted that you could have such a huge mess up, and even if you reinstate these people, you then celebrate it. I would imagine you would at least by at minimum want to try to like brush it under the rug or something. So to me, it shows that I understand the level of mistrust because if those are things that are happening and they happen when you're celebrating people who messed things up, and I think you have seen enough things either personally or community wise that have led you to believe something a certain way. It comes down to personal bias, right? We've talked about personal bias a lot. We all have a personal bias. Personal bias is not a dirty word. It's, how we view and see the world has all based off what our personal experiences are. And I feel like if you have been in a position enough times, why wouldn't you feel a certain way? And I think trauma does that do that to you. I'll give a personal story. It's not police related, but it goes along with what you're saying. Is I shared at the beginning of the show how I had a period of time in my life where it was like everything that could go wrong went wrong. And I even said to my therapist at one point in time, at what point can I start feeling okay again? Because I'm afraid to feel okay. Because it seems like every time I finally start to feel okay again, the other shoe drops. And I know you're not supposed to live life that way, but I now have had enough things reinforced that every time I start to feel okay, something happens. Like I'm afraid now. And then I think that goes to what you're saying is you have had enough things happen that have just continually reinforced your personal bias, right? You've had enough experiences or have viewed enough experiences of other people that your personal bias has been reinforced. And so at this point in time, you are looking for something to come out and say otherwise to your personal bias because trauma does play a part and it helps shift what your personal bias is. It shifts how you view and you see the world. But I think you have a good grasp on it because of your personal bias of being in a police family too. You recognize that it's not everybody, that it's not all cops, but you definitely have seen a system. It's like the little bit of have you ever seen like the saying where I love people like individuals are smart but crowds are not type of thing, and it's kind of the same mentality, right? You know, from an officer to officer basis, for the most part, they're probably good people. But when there's a system that helps protect injustices, kind of like in the Jeffrey Dahmer case, like why the heck would these two people get celebrated or rewarded for what was a huge, in my opinion, a huge mess up? I mean, the fact that they still had their jobs was amazing, let alone getting rewarded. And if you've had enough of those experiences, I can understand why you would feel the way that you do. And I think when people say that they don't feel that way because maybe they haven't had those experiences, because your personal biases are essentially coming at a topic in two different ways, and that's when it comes down to, I'm going to bring it back around to growth mindset here, is you have to have open conversations. I'm not questioning anything that you are saying to me because I've had conversations with people and I've asked, please explain it to me. Please help me understand. And so I've had those conversations. So it totally makes sense to me. But had I not had those conversations, then I might have to sit here and be like, well, King, tell me more. What experiences have you had? What made you feel that way? And I would say, well, here's my experience, and we can come to a better understanding of our both of our personal biases. But I understand the way that you feel because I've had those conversations with people. I, I haven't had to experience things the same way that you have experienced things, but it's important for me to hear your experience and it's important for me to hear the experiences of others so that I can better understand what the issue is rather than me just going, well, I don't have to deal with that, so it must not be a thing.
And to that point, just for clarification purposes, I did a little more research and I found out that those officers were not awarded an
Okay,
Officer of the
good.
Year
That makes
award.
me feel better because the
That
show
was
made
not,
it seem like they got an award for that.
yeah,
Not for that, but in general.
Netflix took another creative license to try to summarize, but they were reinstated, they were paid, and then one of them went on to become, I think, the police chief or the head of the union. So they just took the award and kind of commonalized all, put all that into an award to say that they did receive some accolades and things of that nature and promotions down the road for their career. So to that point though, the trauma is so bad, and I was just really thinking about this other day, that I have sitcoms that I grew up watching that I love. Um, Black shows that have my culture. Um, then I've watched drama movies that I love that had my drama. But I can tell you this: there's not too many. There's very few Black shows that I've seen that at one point, if they've been on TV for like 3 seasons, they did not cover the issue of policing and
Mhm.
the characters on the show being racially profiled or being mistreated by the police. So it's like I can't even escape it while watching TV. Is where I'm going
Yeah.
with this. So not only is it in my real life that I've experienced it, then I experience it from conversations that I have from people in my community. But to try to watch TV to escape things, the show is going to focus on it. So I can't even escape it from the show. So
Yeah.
it's just so integrated into the culture that that's the part to me that I find troubling. It's like I look for a way that we can, change the system. And that's when I realized that there is really no way to change that kind of a system. A new system has to be created. Because, like I said, to me, what really bothers me the most is how the police unions double down on the police. And it's like these are people who supposed to be law abiding, law protecting, law enforcement. So you're supposed to
Mhm.
enforce the law, but you throw the law out the window to double down and to protect your own. And that's the culture to me. That's the systems that need to be changed. Because at the end of the day, a human is going to be a human. If a human has bias, then and you put in situations, and again, this is my understanding of what police have to go through. If you walk into a situation where you know this is a dangerous neighborhood, there's been murders, there's been a lot of violence and activity, and you have to go into that neighborhood as a police officer. In a lot of cities, such as Baltimore, where I live, the police officers are by themselves, so they're not
Yeah.
even coming as like you show you on TV, where it's 3 or 4 officers responding. It's initially one officer responding to a call by himself. Then he calls for backup, and you know that's a bad situation. And of course, you have a job you want to come home to, your bias is going to kick in, self survival is going to kick in, and you may
Mhm.
make mistakes right there in that moment. I can understand that. But what bothers me is that how the police unions, when the officer does make a mistake, they come out and just
How they deal
give that
with it.
officer and give him his back, and takes his word. The courts take his word, and the media takes the officer's word. That's the part to me that sticks in my craw, so to speak, that I think that needs to really be called attention to. Because you're never going to really change people's bias. The best you can do is create a system. And this is what I advocate is if you want your pension, you tie it to the police officer's pension. In order
Mhm.
for you to get your pension when you retire, you can't have more than 2 unarmed shootings in your career. And if you do, you lose on your pension. So that would make a police officer much more mindful of how my actions are going to impact my income, my ability to survive down the road, right? But just kind of going back with the fixed mindset again, that's what I want folks to begin to look at. The dangers that we talked about today, from Jeffrey Dahmer to policing and the issues around the policing, that's the harmful ramifications of having a fixed mindset. If not change your mindset, this is what can happen. People can die. You know, justice is undone or injustice is created. So as we begin to wrap up our show, as we got, top near the top of the hour, my question now would be, let's kind of end on a positive note and say, what can we do as steps that you would recommend to now begin to move away from this fixed mindset to more of the growth perspective, and begin to start at least begin on that journey?
That's a good question. And I feel like I'm beating a horse with this, or I'm a broken record, but I think it's so much of it is communication. And we put our walls up oftentimes. We don't want to hear it. We get defensive. And I think that's a natural reaction. I want people to know. I think ultimately when our ideals or our values are feeling like they're being threatened in any way, it's natural to put a wall up. Especially if it's coming at you in a defensive or a critical manner. And that's why I always try to express, like, you can't come into these conversations critically of one another, because the person will immediately shut down. We all put up our defenses and our walls when we feel like someone is being critical or they're attacking us. It really has to just be a level of open communication and trying to understand somebody else's perspective, and somebody else's personal biases. There's a couple of key things when I think about growth perspective, and those key things are personal bias and understanding how everybody has a different perspective, and something also called conscious processing. And conscious processing is this thing, you might hear something and your initial or immediate thought is maybe, kind of an intrusive thought, something that you're like, oh yeah, that, I can't stand it when people do that. So it's horrible. Like, they should get this bad thing should happen to them. But then when you stop for a second, you go, no, I don't really mean that. I'm just frustrated with the scenario or the whatever. And that's not honestly how I feel. And I think some people misconstrue what conscious processing is. They think that, that's my gut reaction. And so that's how I feel, or this is how it is, or I'm a horrible person, or no, I mean, we all do that. We all have kind of these initial thoughts, and then your ability to think through it and say, okay, I don't really feel that way, or this is how I wanted to see it, or that's called conscious processing.
Mm.
And it's a really important skill. In fact, I think at times people like Jeffrey Dahmer or different people who do horrible things, I always wonder if their conscious processing is actually something that is damaged in some way because they have that initial gut thought and then they act on it instead of going, wait a second, let me calm down, let me think through this. And so I think when you think about trying to fix things, you have to understand your personal biases and you have to understand that your personal biases are your personal biases. They're not everybody else's. Everybody else has been living their own life. And if anything, it's a good time for you to come in and hear other people's perspectives and different experiences and to expand upon your understanding of the world and essentially grow your knowledge of the world and other people. And then I think you have to take into that conscious processing. Maybe you were telling me something, and my first gut instinct is like, what? That's ridiculous. But then I have to take that moment instead of acting on it and think through, well, okay, well, given what King has told me and what they've experienced, and they're like, okay, that makes sense. And I conscious process through a little bit of what you're saying to me before I just kind of gut check or react to something. And I think those are all things that people need to be aware of: your personal biases, your ability to conscious process, and then communicate, and not doing it in a defensive manner or a critical manner, but really with the mindset of, I want to hear what you have to say so that I can understand. And it goes back to what we initially opened up with, of those core values versus a fixed mindset. I am not obligated to change my mind based on what you have shared with me. I'm not. I can continue to feel the same way that I do because maybe it is a core value of mine that I feel a certain way about police or mental health or whatever topic, religion, whatever you want it to name it. I'm not obligated to change my mind, but I am much more well equipped to make better decisions if I have all the facts. And the more that you talk to people and you learn from people and you hear from people, you will have more facts because you will have more perspectives to take into consideration when you are making your final decision towards how you feel about something. So if we would all just take a minute to not get so worked up and offended and actually hear people out, that's when we're actually going to have the knowledge that we need to make the type of change that needs to occur.
Absolutely. I think those are wise words, And just one other quick point about Jeffrey Dahmer. See, that's another example. I think I was watching his show because I like the actor, and that brought up police trauma. So that's why I say,
Mm.
I can't seem to escape it. No matter what I watch, it's going to get thrown in my face that there's
Yeah.
this system of police profiling, racial injustice around policing that it just permeates in our culture today.
Yeah.
But what I want to commend you on is, I think what you gave is a correct advice that we can follow as far as beginning to now open ourselves to the fact that yes, you might not change I might not my mind might not be changed by what you're saying, but I am committed to listen to what you have to say because I see you as a human being and I'm open to hear your perspective. And
Yeah.
I think that's the most we can hope for as we begin to build. And I just want to share with our listening audience. Hopefully, you all got that from this discussion. That again, no matter what you may see or hear from another person, just be open to hear their perspective and ask yourself at the end of the day, what can I learn new from their perspective? So, Dr. Eccleston, I just want to. You have any closing thoughts you want to share with our listening audience as we wrap up?
No, I think, I went on my long-winded rant there and I think you summed it up beautifully, but I just hope we all can listen to one another and grow from one another, grow our perspective through the voices and the ideas of others.
And I just want to add that there's more positive enjoyment and fulfillment if love is your intention, not hate. So focus on love when in doubt. And listening audience, thank you for listening to another episode of The Growth Perspective. We look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks on Monday at 10 a.m. And Dr. Elkerson, thank you for your investment of time and wise words as well. And until next show, be peaceful and have a blessed life.